All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for joining. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this link so that you can invite all of your friends to join this conversation. Today, it's day 2 of the African Union peace talks about Ethiopia, and we're going to be going through some of the new developments, some of the latest attacks from the West. As far as the disinformation goes, some new civic institutions and surprising organizations that are buying into the TPLF narrative and what you can do about it. We'll also talk about the midterm elections that are coming up. Organizations like AEPAC and GLEAN, Ethiopian American Development Council, have been doing a lot of work to sort through candidates and current officials so that they can help you figure out who to vote for on November 4th, which is just right around the corner. There's also a Twitter space ahead of it on October 30th that some folks are holding, so we'll talk a little bit about that. So while we're waiting, and we've got some 2 great guests today to help me sort through all the craziness around their reporting on the Ethiopia conflict and all these different voices that show up, really fueling the propaganda and fueling the conflict and how we can get around it as a community. So I have Elias Hiruy from AEPAC, the American Ethiopian Public Action Committee, with me today. I've got Nebiyu, the co-founder of the Ethiopian American Development Council, also joining the discussion today. So I'm really excited to get their takes on what's going on day 2 of the African Union peace talks in South Africa about the conflict in Ethiopia. So while we're waiting, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. If you haven't subscribed already, I know a lot of people watch channels and then forget to actually hit that subscribe. I am guilty of it all the time. So make sure that you have subscribed. I saw my subscribers jump up yesterday after the live with Nebiyu, and so I'm really thankful for all of you who heard me and who did what you could and who passed it around and got some of the subscribers up. And we are on eoanews.com. If you want to support independent journalism, I'm as independent as it comes. So you can go to eoanews.com and contribute there, or there's also a Patreon subscription account. You can go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Hermela TV. Kenneth, you're back. Thank you. I'm seeing some familiar faces. Helena, familiar usernames rather, and some faces. Thank you so much for joining, you guys. We're going to try to do this every Monday through Friday, particularly during weeks like this where the African Union peace talks are happening, and we want to try to stay up to date and to also stay just united as a community and not get frustrated, and really be able to have a platform where we can vent, where we can strategize so that we know how to move forward. The fight does not stop regardless of what happens on the military front in Tigray. As you guys know, the TPLF has an apparatus and some very devoted activists that will continue to fuel the propaganda, that will always find people to help them fuel it because of the amount of capital that they've been able to amass over the last almost 30 years. And so the people, the Ethiopian people, the Eritrean people, the people of the Horn have to stay engaged. And there's many ways to do that. You can do it on social media. You can do it by reaching out to media outlets. You can do it by using your vote, which is something that we'll really talk about today, particularly with Elias here with me. The American Ethiopian Public Action Committee has been sort of the forefront on, at least nationally, in terms of trying to sort through candidates and help you decide who to vote for. Because when you go to the polls on November 4th, and I felt this during the primaries, there's a lot of names that you may not recognize down to the district judge level. And no, we may not have answers for you about each one of them, but at least as far as who's going to Congress and other key positions, there is a sort of cheat sheet that you can follow regardless of where you are in the country to help you vote. So a few things on our doc today. Of course, whatever we can glean from the second day of peace talks, we'll talk about some of the rhetoric that continues to come out of the State Department, some of the rhetoric that continues to come out of TPLF officials. I was able to confirm where Debretsion is because he was not listed on that document of 7 TPLF representatives. So we'll talk about that too in just a little bit. We've also seen a resurfacing of Getachew Reda And so we'll get into that a little bit and just go into some of the rhetoric that's coming out of TPLF activists, how Ethiopians as a whole from all over the country can respond, how Eritreans can respond. This allegation of genocide, this really cynical campaign of the hashtag Tigray genocide that was started by the TPLF camp right when the war started. It looked like exactly at the same time. We'll get into that a little bit. It's a very difficult allegation to respond to because the allegation itself is so cynical. The response to it can be really difficult. You don't want to negate people's suffering, but you also want to be able to explain the context and be able to make it clear who the culprits are and what needs to leave the variable for the people to suffer less. So that's something we'll discuss in terms of how to address it. And then, like I said, a couple of organizations that kind of came out of the woodwork, or so it feels, in terms of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial. I was so disappointed to see them share an article that felt so propagandized, saying that 500,000 people in Tigray had been starved or murdered, and pointing to the Ethiopian government as culpable for those numbers. You know, a lot of us were responding in the comment section with the data that we have, the articles that we have, and just our response as general Horn of Africa citizens. And then there's also another think tank that popped up that's essentially, not essentially, that is doing exactly this, which is calling for sanctions on Ethiopia, which, if you know the context, it doesn't make sense. So without further ado, I've got Elias Hiruy from AEPAC, which is American Ethiopia Public Affairs Committee, and then Nebiyu Asfaw, co-founder of the Ethiopian American Development Council. So let's bring y'all in here. Thank you so much for coming and making the time, first of all.
Thank you, Hermela.
Thank you for having us, Hermela.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure. It's gonna be a banger. I feel it. It's gonna. This is a good crew right here. You know, I like I said at the beginning of this, part of this is so that we have this communal place to be able to sort through these completely gaslighting headlines that we see from Western media, from the State Department, from TPLF activists, from these civic institutions, and otherwise, you know, seemingly honorable organizations like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial that continue to just get caught up in this propaganda that the TPLF has been weaving for a very long time. It's not the first time that they've claimed genocide after attacking people. And so the first thing I'll say is it's day 2. I did try to get some more information on the military front. Days in a row, people have been claiming that Mekelle Airport is under ENDF. Days in a row, I see people on social media claiming that ENDF has complete control of the city of Mekelle, the capital of Tigray. So far, my sources tell me that we're not quite there yet. One of the sources that I talked to said, if we say Mekelle Airport is under ENDF control, it's essentially saying that the entire city of Mekelle is under control. So you're not going to see the airport, but not the city. So that's a little bit of context. Anything you guys are hearing that's worth noting in terms of the military front?
Maybe I'll defer to you first.
It's a lot to sort through.
I think you summarized it really well, Hermie. I think there's a lot of obviously speculation because there's not a whole lot of information coming out from the government, and whatever TPLF says is 99% a lie. So it's really hard to know exactly what is happening on the ground. But what we do know is that the TPLF, has lost dozens of very important strategic towns and cities, and the fact that Mekelle is surrounded, at least, or the ENDF is in the proximity of Mekelle, is not disputed. So what that tells us is that a military solution is at hand, and that the TPLF has been unable to resist the advance of the defensive moves by the allied forces, the Ethiopian government. As we've also learned that the TPLF ringleaders were transported out of Mekelle in a United States military plane, which is really very curious. But like you said, Debretsion has remained behind while Getachew Reda and the others have gone to South Africa, from where we've seen some really measured remarks, not the typical, we will destroy you and all that that we're used to hearing from Getachew Reda. But I think that this is checkmate for the Ethiopian forces. I think that TPLF is extremely desperate, and if there had been any fantasy from the TPLF side that they can militarily overthrow the Ethiopian government and get back into power, that dream has been crushed. And if there has been any fantasy from the TPLF backers, whether it's the Biden administration or other Western institutions, the diplomatic methods and other PR disinformation campaign that they've been using to bamboozle the world into getting the TPLF back in power, that has also failed flat on its face. So really the only thing remaining from here on is what kind of negotiation for TPLF surrender with the current South Africa is what I'm anticipating to hear. It's just really hard to imagine anything else happening at the moment outside of that.
Yeah, Elias, I know we've covered a lot of what's really verified information when it comes to the military war front. So I want to ask this of you. Some people like to follow the play-by-play of what's happening on the ground. I'm not necessarily one of them, although, I try to get information for the audience. What's your take on how important or what role does the actual military defeat play in the overall picture of this, and what role does it not play in the overall piece of the horn?
Yeah, Hermela, I think Nebiyu summarized it excellently. I think, the war, you can see that the mainstream media start reporting in a particular manner when the government is winning and when TPLF is running for their life, right? So to me, the problem where I have my biggest problem is, the Tigrayan people have been under TPLF occupation for the last 2 years, have suffered untold stories that will come after the days of TPLF, I hope. I don't follow the play-by-play as well. Basically what I do is I Google the Ethiopian news and I take a look at it and I just go skim all of the MSM. And depending on what you hear on what you see on the mainstream media, you can tell where the war is going. And necessarily the play-by-play events that happened during the war, I don't need to know. This is whether the Ethiopian government wins and gets Mekelle under control tomorrow. Today, what we have to remember is that these are folks have died from both sides. Some forcibly, right, by TPLF. So to me, it's a pain, right? We're losing people right to left, going to Mekelle, and at the same time, from the other side, folks who are forced by TPLF to fight this unnecessary war are suffering. And the suffering of those folks is more of my concern than the actual play-by-play event. I think as a diaspora as a whole here in the U.S., what we need to focus is what's after TPLF. After we win the war, we have to win the heart of everyone, whether it's a TPLF supporter or a government supporter. We have to win everybody's heart. And we have to look beyond that and look at Ethiopia. What kind of Ethiopia do we want to build? That should be the question for the diaspora. I don't think hanging out on YouTube and looking at all the different newses, and for folks who are actually making money on this event, I don't think that's productive as far as I can see it. More, this discussion is what needs to happen. Where are we going? Once the war is over, what do we do? How do we win the hearts of TPLF supporters? How do we rebuild Tigray? How do we rebuild Ethiopia as a whole? Ethiopia has been scarred by war, right to left, from the Derg regime through TPLF and through this war. So how do we move into a state where no bullet is fired, where Ethiopians will prosper, work, and succeed in their country? How do we stop, the Western influence on the internal affairs of Ethiopia? This is more of my pain point than the actual play-by-play of the war. So this is my take, and maybe you summarized the remaining aspects very well.
Yeah, I think that is a major question for everybody. How do you win the hearts and minds of people who are Ethiopians from Tigray, whether it's on the ground or in the diaspora? I do guess that the people on the ground have a very different take, or a much more layered take on this issue than those in the diaspora, who seem very much one note, regardless of what the situation is. I did learn today that there is some fighting, some resistance in the city of Mekelle, but it's not anywhere near what it used to be before. And I've talked to sources, and I mentioned this before, that have family members that are hiding out in different parts of the city because they do not want to be conscripted, because they understand that if they go, that they're likely not coming back. And as we've seen, even mainstream media outlets like Reuters, who's very problematic in many ways, but took 3 months to do a report, which is about how long it should take to do a report in a war zone. And so in this case, they did take that time, where they talked to a lot of IDPs that had come out of Tigray. So that's a very important note. The fact that even though that they had been told that these people were out to get you, to wipe out your ethnicity, those on the other side of the border in the Amhara region, Ethiopians as a whole, Eritreans, they still were able to discern the facts and actually leave the Tigray region and go to these IDP camps. And many of them were saying they didn't want to go to the war front. We saw children that were broadcasted on media that said that, their parents, they came for them, and their parents said, she's too young, he's too young. And so they basically escaped to get out of there. We saw a man from Tigray that was on EMS, which has been a pretty reliable channel as far as I could see. And he was talking about how they came for his adult son, and they told him that if he doesn't go to war, then he doesn't get humanitarian aid. And he basically said, I'm not exchanging my son for grain. And then his son eventually just sort of fled so that he didn't have to fight. So there are a lot of stories out of Tigray that have not come out. And so I do have a lot more faith in the people on the ground, and the Ethiopian government has a huge task, I think, to make sure that wrongs are righted, and that the people do feel safe and understand that under the Ethiopian government, they're equal citizens like anybody else in the country. So we'll have that conversation in just a little bit. So I want everybody to be able to comment on that, because I think that's a really huge thing. How do you change the hearts and minds of those who have bought the TPLF story, regardless of all of this data that comes out? So let's come to today, some new information. The head of the African Union, Musa Faki, is in Canada, as reported by Canadian professor Anne Fitzgerald. This comes after a recent tweet from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who said that he had a conversation with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau. What this means exactly, we don't know. We do also know that Secretary Blinken, who was with USAID yesterday, will be going to Canada on Thursday and Friday. And the State Department said that trip is to talk about North American competitiveness. So I'm not saying any of this means anything in terms of the African Union head being in Canada, a place that is reportedly going to take some of the TPLF folks if they do go on get amnesty, but that's just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, Getachew Reda is back in play. He showed up with this picture that one of the TPLF journalist put out there, and we haven't seen him tweet in 6 days, and so it was something that we had talked about. We still haven't seen him tweet, but we do see that he is, suited up, but looks a little more cleaned up. And the first thing that he does is retweet a tweet from Secretary Anthony Blinken that went out yesterday that said that the delegations in South Africa need to reach an immediate cessation of hostilities as the first step towards peace. I know the role of the U.S. is something that we have talked about repeatedly. And as time goes on, I know where I'm kind of standing on it. Where do you guys stand in terms of the U.S. and the UN's role today, day 2 of peace talks in South Africa? Nebiyu, I'll start with you.
Yeah, the every day what we've seen this week, every day the propagandistic attacks on Ethiopia and Eritrea has become more extreme by the day, and very well coordinated, almost verbatim, what they're saying, and it's becoming very clear that Ethiopia is near victory, and the U.S., the Biden administration, is scrambling to control the outcome of this negotiation, and to find the best deal they can potentially get for the TPLF. Does that mean somehow threatening their way into keeping the TPLF as a political entity? Who knows, right? But any one of that, regardless of all the threats that are being pushed and all the demands that are being made about immediate cessation of hostility. I mean, where was that threat 5 weeks ago when the TPLF broke a 5 months humanitarian truce and launched an attack? And remember, just 5 weeks ago, the TPLF was in Wallo, in North Wallo, had occupied places like Kobo and multiple cities. Where were these warnings then? Where was this demand for the TPLF to cease hostilities? It wasn't. So it's very clear that despite the effort by the Biden administration to present itself as some kind of a neutral, objective mediator, there's just no evidence to support that. And you're talking about winning the hearts and minds of people. The U.S. under this administration has failed miserably to capture the hearts and minds of the Ethiopian people, and you cannot, be successful in this without the support of the Ethiopian people. So, if there was really a desire for peace, and if that was the desire, the best thing they could do would be stay out of it. I mean, at the very least, what they're doing is giving the TPLF false hope. The fact that Getachew Reda, his first tweet out of the war zone, is to retweet the Secretary of State. So I think that at this time, it's becoming very clear. If it was unclear before, we all know that the U.S. has supported the TPLF regime from 91 to 2018 unconditionally, and throughout this war from 2020 until now unconditionally. And the phone calls are increasing. There was letters that was sent from the Senate yesterday, was hyperbole. I mean, exaggerated numbers, unverified numbers, claiming 500,000 people have died with no citation. I mean, it's really embarrassing, And on cue, these talking points that are coming out of the State Department are being repeated and repeated by, multiple people, and these talking figures and demagogues that are coming out of, the woodworks to really, dissipate all this disinformation. You know what this reminds me of is the time when there was all that hyperbole about Addis Ababa is about to fall, but in reverse, right? So I think it's time to kind of stay put, tune that out. but it's really still not time to relax. It's time to continue to speak the truth, because they've elevated the game to another level. I mean, they're getting institutions like the Holocaust Museum. I'm sure there's people who have connections, and they're making phone calls to their buddies and saying, hey, put out a statement like this. It's just really unusual for institutions like that, without any proof, to put out disinformation like that. It just really shows the complete disregard for the truth and disrespect for the people of Ethiopia. And it also shows their desperation of how much they want to save the TPLF. Is the TPLF this important to them? It's just really, when you think about it, all this shenanigans really makes you question what is going on. I mean, why are they really hell bent on even destroying the reputation of the United States, and sacrificing a relationship with 120 million people for the sake of warlords?
Yeah, I think the question is there something on the other side that's even worse than what this looks like for the United States and the United Nations? I mean, we know that the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom, has been implicated in orchestrating humanitarian aid to go to armed rebels as opposed to civilians, while also saying Tigray is under siege and people are starving. So that would implicate him in people starving, if in fact they were starving, even though in much of the time the Ethiopian government was facilitating as much aid as it could during an active war, and particularly a flow of aid, according to the World Food Program, during times of peace. Elias, this also applies to Nebiyu with the work that he does with the Ethiopian American Development Council, but specifically with you working on AEPAC and working on the civic engagement of Ethiopians, Eritreans, people from the Horn of Africa, and allies and true progressives that understand a U.S. Africa policy. How do people balance and reconcile these things? First of all, the idea that we do live in America and there's a lot of privileges that come with that, right? And most of us like those privileges, like living in America, probably wouldn't choose to live anywhere else, regardless of the problems, right? However, still feel a responsibility to the countries where we were born. In some cases, we feel 50-50, equally as American as we are Ethiopian. But you see the State Department and the foreign policy of the U.S. literally help cause the deaths of people on the ground, enable this terrorist group that has no regard for life. And the system feels so big sometimes for people. And so at times they may not think that their vote matters. So how do we reconcile the fact that we're Americans, we like the opportunities this country has given us, but we hate the foreign policy, particularly towards Africa, and yet we still need to go to the polls? How are we supposed to look at this situation?
That's a very good question, Hermela, and one that I've been engaged in for quite some time. Before I go there, just to add on one that you said, it feels, like if you look at TPLF history, when TPLF was in power, has been killing people right to left and has been committing a lot of atrocities, which some would need to be studied to determine whether those are genocide or not. During that time, the different government administrations that came and went here in the U.S. has not said much at all, except few senators and few people in power. Much of it was not reported. There was no addressing of any of the atrocities that happened everywhere. Not a single place in Ethiopia, everywhere, including Tigray. There has been a lot of crimes that were committed. That was never announced. But now on the flip side, when you look at it, when Ethiopia is actually in a better situation compared to the last, 27 years of TPLF, where $30 billion got, walked away, right? Forbes reported that. Now we see some sort of like an effort to save TPLF. That I really have a heartburn, because if you look at it, when TPLF was marching towards Addis Ababa, we were worried, right? We were thinking that they are going to go in there and they are going to commit atrocities exactly the way they did it throughout. And not only that, the country is going to crumble. But at that junction, the U.S. administration, what the Biden administration, what they should have done was should have taken a stand to say TPLF, if they really meant for peace to come at that junction, they should have stopped them from marching all the way down there and commit all those atrocities. There was nothing was said from the administration. Actually, most of the reporting appeared to support TPLF effort to go towards Addis Ababa. So now all this shenanigans, just the way Nebiyu stated it, when you look at it, it feels like someone is trying to save a friend. All the reporting is misaligned. The reality on the ground is entirely different from what the world is reporting. The MSMs are putting out reports which conflict all the facts that we know. Misinformation, misguided policies are in play here. So this is going to lead me to the question you asked. And I would like to start with the word engagement. We have to learn from the one thing that TPLF did very well throughout when they were in power and before they were in power was that they were extremely engaged in the process here in America. They have formed relationship with different candidates, different leaders, and have pleaded their cause. From the Ethiopian perspective, there was little to none done. We have not engaged at all throughout the 27 years of TPLF. Very few engagement has been done, and not probably as successful as TPLF. So the burden is on us, on the diaspora, both Ethiopian, Eritreans. I will include Somalians as a whole. It is on us to make sure that we plead our case. We bring the facts to the leaders and the candidates across the country, so that the policies are impacted in the long run and the facts come to light. So how do we do that? I mean, one of the challenges that I keep on running is folks ask me, are you asking me to vote for a Democrat? Was one of the challenges that I kept on getting on several different occasions, including the protest here in DC on Sunday. The one thing I'll say is that we have to be predictably clear, and I've said this to several different people. We have to be predictably clear that we, the diaspora here, the Ethiopian diaspora, is going to elect only pro-Ethiopian candidates who base their policy in their from their views based on facts, and who are pro-Ethiopian. And you're showing the ones that are endorsed by AEPAC. The candidates that you see here, we have sat down, had a discussion with them, and they have confirmed, they have agreed with us to work with us and to make sure that, the welfare of Ethiopia is kept, and that at some point, if possible, we are going to form not possible, we are working towards forming the Ethiopian caucus in Congress, and we will continue engaging with them to make sure that Ethiopian welfare is kept as a whole, the HOA, the Horn of Africa, be it Eritrea or Somalia, right? But what I ask folks is to engage and to be issue voters, not to hold grudge on a party, but to look at the candidate individually and to look at their, what they are bringing to the table, right? Are they pro-Ethiopians? Are they going to make the decision based on facts on the ground, as opposed to maybe an intended goal or something else that we don't really understand, right? So we need these folks to be the people who speak for Ethiopia behind those closed doors. One thing I would also like to add is that we are not, I'm an American Ethiopian, right? An Ethiopian American, either way you can go. We have to make sure that Ethiopia is a good ally of US. That's how we want it, and that's how we want to map the road going forward. So in order to do that, we have to engage, be it Democrat, be it Republican, be it independent, be an issue voter. Plead your issue. Let's discuss the concern that we have. The disjointed misalignment policy was a fact back in Ethiopia on the ground that needs to be discussed, need to be ironed out, and we need to make sure that Ethiopia moves in the right direction. In that this undue burden from the West, particularly the Joe Biden administration, on the current government and on the people of Ethiopia needs to stop. There was no reason for the current administration to kick Ethiopia out of Agua. None. None. No qualifying reason. So what I ask folks is engage. Engage was your candidates, not during midterm, not only during the general election. Continuous engagement. Call, have a sit down, do write a letter. This is exactly what TPLF mastered in the last I don't know what 30, 40, 50 years, and we need to catch up. We need to wake up every day. Give half an hour of your time to make sure that you have done something to protect your roots, where you came from. Is my message to folks as a whole.
Yeah, and APAC has done a lot of the legwork, and so has the Ethiopian American Development Council in Colorado. Just recently, last couple of weeks, they had this African-centered voters candidates forum, which is, as far as I know, a first of its kind, where people of African descent or that have connections to Africa but are American and have certain uh, issues that are important to them as far as the U.S. Africa policy came together in Denver, put together in part by the Ethiopian American Development Council, and they actually heard from candidates. I thought that was, a really cool thing. And before we move on to another topic, Nebiyu, since you were and your organization was a big part of that, it was really impressive to watch. First of all, the live show was just really well done. It had several cameras, different angles, switching up during the taping, but a lot of interesting candidates showed up. And how did it feel afterwards? I mean, this was something that hadn't was a thought, something we talked about in terms of voting as an African diaspora bloc, but how did it feel actually coming together in person and being in front of those candidates and hearing what they had to say about the issues that the people in that room cared about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely one of its kind. I don't think that I have seen an event of that kind of an event in the past. It was truly a Pan-African event from multiple African countries. AEPAC was also one of the organizers, as well as EADC, ASEC, and other organizations. Thanks to Hello Ethiopia TV, it was really the image and videos were captured very professionally. So, and there was over a dozen candidates, from candidates for governor to Senate, to multiple House seats, local seats, Attorney General, and it is about time that we come together. And when I say come together, not just as Ethiopians, not just as Eritreans or East Africans, but as Africans. And when I say Africans, that also includes all of people with the African heritage that have been marginalized for far too long, right? It's about pulling together. That would make you just that much more powerful. Many of the elections throughout the United States are close elections. Whether you look at the election in Georgia or the election here in Colorado, in several states, believe me, your vote matters. Our vote matters, let alone a big block of an African immigrant community voting as a block, let alone a massive Ethiopian and Eritrean community voting as a block. You yourself as an individual voting makes a difference. I would like to give you an example of what we did in Colorado 4 years ago during one of the mayoral elections. This was Mike Kaufman, who was running for office, who's a friend of the community. The community went out and voted for him as a block. And the election was decided by 200 votes. 200 votes. And that tells you that we made a difference, that we swung the election one way or another. So everywhere we live, whether it's a close election, whether it is a swing state, whether it is the red state or a blue state, the mere fact that you show up and you vote makes a difference. Here's the thing. America, and we're Americans, like Elias said, America has one of the lowest voting percentage of the Western world. All right. So this is supposed to be this big democracy, but more than half the people don't even vote. I'm talking about Americans, because the people that actually participate in the democracy are so small. The decisions are being made. People are being elected sometimes by fringe who are coming together and voting as blocks, right? And whether we like it or not, whether you vote or not vote, decisions are being made that affect your life. You know, whether it's Ethiopia, your personal life, every aspect of our life is affected. So that was the spirit behind that event. And I think that if anyone has an opportunity, you can go to the Hello Ethiopia TV channel and watch the Colorado African Forum. But there was some bold statements that were made, and this shows you how much research this candidate have done. For example, on the issue of Ethiopia and Eritrea. I mean, one of the videos kind of went viral. The candidate for Congress in Colorado District 7, you know, saying that the TPLF is the crime syndicate and that they need to be dealt with. And, you know, boldly saying that the Biden administration is emboldening the TPLF at the expense of the Ethiopian people. These are people that are going to be in Congress tomorrow and making decisions. And these little things we do makes a big difference, because even one person in Congress makes a difference. If you can look at what Senator Bobman does, the damage that he's done to Ethiopia was all this um, sanctions, the SR 93, everything that he's doing, the HR 6600, and now today we've seen news that he's being investigated for corruption. Right, this is one person that has created so much chaos. So you know, just to summarize, it's important that we're involved. It's important that if you're a United States citizen, the most American thing you could do is to vote. And like Elias said, it's really not about the party. I'm not an affiliated with any party. I'm independent, and I think we all should be independent. And you should vote, you know, by the person. What does the person stand for? Are they pro Ethiopia? Are they pro Africa? If yes, that deserve your vote, especially at this time. Ultimately, what we want is for both our countries, the United States and Ethiopia, to treat each other with respect and equity. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, and you know, there was a comment that I'm going to try to pull up if I can find it, that was talking about, you know, regardless of which party we vote for, the foreign policy. There we go, David. So David says, nothing to do about election. This is foreign policy. Democrats and Republicans have almost same foreign policy. My thoughts. I don't want to belabor this topic too much, but I want to get a quick answer from you guys on that comment. Let's start with you, Elias, and we want to come back to Nebiyu.
I was itching for it, Hermela. So here, this is one thing that we all have to understand, right? Foreign policies are long-term as issues, maybe, right? But the one thing that we have to understand is it could get impacted. But it's going to require, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We don't sprint, vote someone, and you're done. New policies are crafted. No, it is a continuous effort. It is hard. It's a difficult work. You got to keep on, contacting your representative, engaging them, having a discussion, and making sure that they understand your issues. One thing we all have to understand is that we elect these people to go in office and to act on our behalf. It's not the other way. They are not doing us a favor. We are voting them in so that they would go in Congress or in the Senate, and to make sure that they vote according to our belief and to the way we see the world. Right? It's not for them to act for their interest. It's not for them to act in a different manner than what we asked. That said, although foreign policies might need some time to get, adjusted, changed, or rewritten in some different manner, there's the enforcement aspect of it. If we are strong, like what we did in Virginia, Nebiyu, I think we did a little harder work and changed a blue state to red, right? So I'm taking, I'm patting my back and patting all of the folks who were involved in that. But the lesson there is that when you concentrate and when you do the marathon run and actually achieve, change something, be part of that change, making sure that everyone vote is counted, and in making those differences, now you get ears. People are interested in talking to you and engaging with you and understanding your issues. And we saw this in Virginia. It did happen. We had several different engagements with our candidates and with our leadership, right? So there are people who are voicing our concern that the Biden administration is not really doing the right thing when it comes to Ethiopia, right? So no, we got voices because we made it happen. We continuously engaged and had discussion. Though we did not get any new policy or anything as such, we sort of, like, some of the things I think slow down, partly because they do understand how the Ethiopian diaspora and community feels. So this is a reflection of all the hard work that was put behind and all of the different diaspora efforts put here in the US. So what does this mean? Going forward, everybody has to go out and vote. Don't waste your vote, and don't do a block vote. Do not just fragment our voice and let it go to West. I'd rather have you vote for Republican or Democrat as opposed to staying home, or independent if need be, instead of staying home. Because when you vote, people pay attention. When you vote, they do postmortem, they do analysis, and they see who voted in what manner, why. We want those whys to be asked, and the follow-up discussion and engagement to happen. I'll leave it at that. And necessarily, you don't have to vote one side or the other side. Issue voting is what we encourage for folks to do. So, Hermela.
Nebiyu, yeah, thanks, Elias. Briefly, I want to get your take on that too, because it's a common comment. Nothing to do about election. This is foreign policy. Democrats or Republicans have almost the same foreign policy. This is from David. What do you say to that?
It's easy to say that, and that, there's valid reasons on why one would say that. But the reality is that each individual that gets elected into Congress has a power, and they can make a choice. We can look at people like Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma that got up on the Senate floor and spoke up on behalf of Ethiopia. We can look at people like Congressman Chris Smith, Congresswoman Sheila from Texas. I mentioned some Republicans and some Democrats who have stood up and spoke up for Ethiopia and literally stopped sanctions, literally killed bills. So what I'm trying to say is that we need some champions in Congress. We need more champions in Congress. And that we can't just be pessimistic and say, oh, it's, the parties don't make a difference. I'm not asking you to vote for one party or another. I'm asking what we're saying is vote for the person, the individual.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the only, it is easy to say, and it's not to say that there's not truth to the fact that, the system at times feels rigged, and it feels like the corruption level in Congress is so just permeating through both sides, particularly with foreign policy. But the one thing I'll add to this before we move on to the next topic is, first of all, it is a long game. So, like I think Elias mentioned, and I'm sure Nebiyu has said this before, there is a level of engagement that I think Ethiopian and Eritrean Americans civically may have not reached before this time of crisis, that we are getting involved in now. I mean, organizations like AEPAC, it feels like they've been around for a long time because it's pretty well run. In terms of on the national stage, there's local organizations, but it wasn't there. It wasn't there before. So, we're planting the seeds for something in the future, and just because we don't really see the fruit of that immediately, and like Nebiyu said, in some cases it's just because we don't actually see it. We don't see what didn't happen because we had a particular congressperson or an elected official there. I want to pull up, and I don't know if this is actually the right document, but speaking of people who aren't favorable to us, people like Senator Menendez, who just is of New Jersey, who continues to lead bills like 3199, which is still out there as far as I know. That is a sanctions bill, a punitive sanctions bill against Ethiopia. During a time where it's so clear at this point that the Ethiopian government has done everything that it can to try to do right by its own people in Tigray, and by the international community's demands, regardless of how ludicrous they sound at times. So many outlets were reporting today that he's facing a new federal investigation. This is 5 years after his last investigation into taking bribes to take certain stances on issues. Is anyone surprised? Okay, is anyone surprised? So, people like that will eventually be on the way out, and we need to have relationships with those who may be replacing them. So I think that's the point. Okay, next topic is another big topic that's more internal, is this issue of how do you win the hearts and minds of people that are our countrymen who just have a very different take on this issue, who've been propagandized in many ways. And Tamrat is speaking to this a little bit. He said, time for healing and reconciliation is very much required. All people who suffered in this horrible war should get counseling and help, especially the youth that experienced the cruelty of this war. There was some other comments along this lines. Okay, this one is, same, but a little bit a different angle. Tesfaye says, I do not believe that winning the hearts and minds of Tagaro is the best issue here. They are the cradle of Ethiopianism, and they are not different from the rest of us. I mean, I agree, but I think the question is, or the issue is, that they have a very different take on that, at least the ones here in the diaspora. So, to kick off this conversation, I want to play a quick clip from Dr. Aregawi Berhe, former TPLF executive committee member who left and was opposition for the last several years. Here's what he had to say about TPLF and the people of Tigray, whether or not they actually care about the people of Tigray or not. Take a listen.
ስለሌላቸው ነው ባይዘው ለህዝቡ አስበው ስለ ህዝቡ ተናግረው አያውቁም። አሁን ትግራይ ተደበደበ፣ ጄኖሳይድ እየተካሄደ ነው፣ ምናምን እየተደረገ ነው፣ ትግራይ ተከበዋል ምናምን ብሎ ያወራሉ። ለትግራይ እና ለህዝቡ አስበው አይደለም፣ ለድርጅቱ ለህወሓት ድርጅት አስበው ነው። ይሄ ድርጅት እየተከበበ ነው ቢሉ ልንሰማቸው እንችላለን። በድርጅቱ ላይ ጄኖሳይድ እየተካሄደ ነው ቢሉ ልንሰማቸው እንችላለን። ለነገሩ ጄኖሳይድ የሚባል ትርጉሙም አያውቁትም ይመስለኛል። ዝም ብሎ እዚህ ቶክስ ካለ አንድ ሰው ከሞተ ወይም ሁለት ሰው ከሞተ ጄኖሳይድ ነው የሚሉት። ይሄ ጄኖሳይድ ዴፊኒሽን አይደለም። ጦርነት ለትግራይ ህዝብ ባህላዊ ጨዋታው ነው ይላሉ። የጦርነት አስከፊነት ዓለም ያወቀው ከጦርነት የባሰ አስከፊ ነገር የሌለ መሆኑ እየታወቀ ባህላዊ ጨዋታ ነው ይላሉ እነዚህ ፖለቲካል ኤሊቶች። ስለዚህ ጤነኛ አእምሮ ነው ያላቸው ወይ ብሎ ለመጠየቅም የሚያስገድድ ሁኔታ ነው ያለው።
To summarize that really quickly, so what he's saying, because it was in subtitles, is that the TPLF doesn't care about the people of Tigray. They start these wars, and then anytime there's a response to it and somebody's hurt, they call it a genocide. So they don't even know what the meaning of genocide means. And they have said, and this has been, just a common rhetoric that is said by TPLF and its supporters, diehard supporters in particular, that war is Tigray's cultural game. And what Dr. Aregawi Berhe, again, for those of you who may be new to the whole Ethiopia topic, is a TPLF executive committee member. So got into this organization when he was very young. A lot of people started when they were teenagers as rebels, picked up a gun. In some cases, they were 13, 14, maybe even younger. So this whole, use of child soldiers started at the inception of the Tigray People's Liberation Front in 1975. But Dr. Aregawi Berhe is in opposition at this point. He works with the current prosperity government. And basically he's saying, we have to question the sanity of these people. And when he says these people, it means the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the political group. So the first question I'll ask you, Nebiyu, is why is this so hard for people to understand at least 2 years into the war? Are you seeing any changes among people that you know that hold these diehard beliefs or did? I don't talk to a lot of people that hold these views anymore because it's just too much. It's akin to harassment. It feels like a waste of my time. I did do it in the beginning, people that I was friends with for some time, but I found that they were not interested in listening to my perspective, but trying to convince me of the fact that this is a genocide and not, a TPLF war that they started to get into power. So, Nebiyu, do you see any changes, or is the rhetoric the same, or are you even having these conversations at this point anymore? And what, how do you see the future on this?
So, what Mr. Aregawi Berhe said, by the way, is right on point. And it points to the deliberate tactic that TPLF used to create this, to make it look like TPLF equals the people of Tigray. And that's the biggest deception that they've succeeded at. And yes, Hermie, I think that we are having conversations. There's people that have believed these stories and stood by it, are finally realizing, but afraid to come out. One thing I would say about the TPLF is it operates like a cult. And most cults, have a certain way of controlling their followers. It's like an ecosystem, echo chamber. They respond to any kind of criticism of the cult by turning the criticism around on the individual. So it turns on you. There's a lot of shaming. There's a lot of guilt trips. There's a lot of traps that have put in place that even if you come to the realization that something is wrong, that you've made to be afraid to speak up, that you're systematically silenced. And this could be by your own family. That's how powerful cults are. So because of that, many people that have really fallen victim to this TPLF cult have really become just talking heads for whatever the talking points is given out by the TPLF, even if it doesn't make any sense. And even if it's detached from reality, right? But I will tell you this much, that over the past few weeks, few months, that there's been an increasing number of people that were former TPLF supporters that are approaching us, that are coming forward and saying, we're done. We want to come back and join our community. We are Ethiopians, we want to work there, but we're ashamed. We are afraid, or they're shaming us. So there's, not a lot, but there's people coming in and dripping in. But I think that that is a signal, a sign for me that there's more of that to come. And if you look at, there's been at least 3 or 4 academic research papers that have been done on people fleeing Tigray. The things that the TPLF has been doing to families, the forced conscriptions, the using aid for war instead of families, all the terrible things that they've been doing, I think have gotten across to the people that this TPLF is liars, that they're chronic pathological liars, and that the people are done. And that's the reason why people are fleeing. That's the reason why people are not standing up with them to go to war like they did before. So despite the TPLF's attempt to spread paranoia in the Tigrayan community, to shame the Tigrayan community, to make it look like the whole world is against you and we are all you got, these lies are scrambling and falling apart. You know what I mean? And ultimately, when you see either Debretsion or Getachew Reda in a handcuff, or exiled and that TPLF dismantled, I think people will wake up. But, you know, for all Ethiopians, for everybody else that is free from the spell of the TPLF, it is really time for us to show compassion and radical love, especially to our Tigrayan brothers and sisters who have been victims of this TPLF tyrants.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing, being very familiar with the way the cult works. You know, I think that for those who benefited from the TPLF regime, I am not one of them. And yet I was still with the activists in the beginning because I thought this was a humanitarian issue. So for those who actually benefited from TPLF, to some degree, they don't have as much of a choice. They have maybe amassed a lot of wealth through the TPLF. They've gotten a lot of you know, opportunities through the TPLF, and so they owe them, right? They kind of owe them, right? So it's that's a decision that they would have to make even after taking all of those benefits, right? But in many cases, this includes the diaspora as well. Most people, you know, do not have direct connections to the TPLF, did not benefit from it, and did not live this glorious life like many of the leadership did for the last several decades. I mean, they have more money than God, as some say, and they've been able to buy so many opportunities, degrees, influence, in a way that the vast majority of the people of the Horn of Africa can't even dream of. The majority of the people of Ethiopia overall, and Tigray in particular, and I've been there twice, they live in poverty, particularly in the rural areas. So why should everybody else who didn't benefit from this group now have to take on the consequences of the decision that the TPLF made? When the TPLF decided to attack the Northern Command and kill soldiers based on ethnic lines or alliances towards the TPLF, which is an ethnic-based political group, that this is the consequences should come onto that group alone. But yet it was the people that paid a large price. You know, they couldn't even protect the people in some cases. They made the people a danger to themselves in some ways by telling them that their enemies were people that weren't their enemies. In some cases they were armed. And you know, we were talking about this earlier with Elias. I've heard several stories, including I guess you'd call it secondhand, but someone has told me directly that they were sent. A young guy was sent into the war front. There was 4 of them. They only had one gun. He's the only one who survived. Went to an IDP camp in one of the major cities, just looking for refuge. And that's happened over and over again. We've heard that story. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the TPLF is interested, and it helps their case on the international stage when more people die, when more people that aren't equipped to fight a war. And so they can call them civilians, but these are people they sent into the war front unequipped in terms of experience, and in terms of weaponry. So 2 years in, I mean, we have to be able to say, this is not my fight. I do not need to take on the consequences of the decisions that this group has made. And I'm hoping, that's what I'm hoping some diaspora are able to do. You don't have to carry the burden and the shame of the decision that the TPLF made unilaterally. Even some of the leadership did not have a hand in this decision. There are people that have died that are good, people that were within the TPLF, at least as far as I know, that were just caught up in it. There's young kids that have caught up in it. So anytime you want to let it go, this shame doesn't have to be yours. So, you know, and I've said this before in terms of the cult, just run away, like change your number, because they're so aggressive when you try to back away from it. I've told one of the young people that was trying to get away from it, just run, change your number. You know, that's kind of how you have to leave a cult. I looked it up, how to leave a cult, and they literally were like, don't tell anyone, pack your bags and go. I swear to God, I looked it up. So it seems to be the only way. So Elias, I mean, I know we're laughing, but it's a heavy topic. But how do you make amends with people that you've been friends with for 10, 15, 20 years, who all of a sudden their whole world has flipped and their views have flipped because of the TPLF propaganda?
Yeah. So Hermela, just if I can say a couple of things here. I left Ethiopia in 1995. 1995. And I didn't go back until 2011 because I was not. I have no plan to go back while TPLF was still in power, right? But in 2011, for some reason, I had some personal reason that I had to go to Ethiopia, and I did go to Ethiopia. From there onward, I traveled to Ethiopia pretty much every year. I'll tell you this. Folks in Addis, they were terrorized. They would not say a word about anything. Not only not forget them, I was terrorized because of 5 to 1 was not a joke. It was happening. It was in my own family. I'm not even I'm not a Tagaru, or I'm not.
Can you explain the 5 to 1 for those who don't know?
Yeah, 5 to 1 is there would be one person for every 5 person that listens to what they are saying and then reports back. It is real.
Cadre.
Yeah, the cadre.
Right.
Yeah, and the spy. They are paid. This operatives are paid. They will be in your family. It could be anybody. It could be your brother, your sister, any person. Because like TPLF was buying people right to left and controlling the whole community. This needs a study by itself, because I'll tell you, after traveling 2-3 years, 2 years or so, I became like them there too, because I controlled everything I said, and I didn't trust anybody in that area. Just like everybody lived under terror. This is an American, like more or less, I'm an American. Go back to Ethiopia feeling this way. Can you imagine what Tagaros felt the last 2 years under TPLF control? Particularly with them controlling all the necessities of everyday life, right? Your food, your water, everything else being controlled. When you wake up, when you go to bed, pretty much like they control the whole 9 yards, right? So now you give your kids, you do this, we trade you trade your kids for food, like all these different stories that we heard, right? New York Times posting those kids holding guns. Can you believe that? Is that really, really real? Like, like an 8-year-old, maybe like 11, 12-year-old kids carrying a gun and running around? Is that right at all? I mean, I really think history is going to judge this time and look back and see all the wrongs that was done on Ethiopia and on the Ethiopian people, and particularly on Tagaro. The Biden administration, by supporting anybody, TPLF did not do any justice to Tigrans at all. That said, how do we transition? How do we move on, right? The one thing I asked folks to do is we need to be very careful when we celebrate the end of this war, right? It is a moment of silence, not a win at all, because we lost a lot of people from both sides. We need, the burden of this war needs to weigh on us, and we have to say no more. This is the end. No more wars, no more people dying right to left. And then we have to do, particularly if there is any TPLF follower or anybody here in the US who wants to come on board with us, we need to be their champion, support them, help them through, make sure that they understand what the country and what the people went through, right? By doing so one at a time, I think we'll make that change. I mostly live within a community that doesn't interact as much with as many Ethiopian people. But that said, if I encounter anyone who needs my support to come on board, I'm behind them, because TPLF has duped a lot of different people. Be it the West, be the Ethiopians, be the TPLF. They have abused a lot of people. What we talked earlier, Hermela, 1/3 of the Tigrans lived on aid while TPLF was in power. That's not looking out for Tigran interest. Tigrans suffered the same pain and trouble as much as the other Ethiopians did. It's just that you don't see it, you don't feel it. Even go back and look at the fighters, the fighters that fought with Derg. If you're not linked somehow, you're still a baker, or you're still working the land. So what I wanted to emphasize was what Nebiyu said. TPLF is a cult, nothing but a cult. It's not representing people. It's not representing anything. It's representing themselves and their own gain. So if we understand that clearly, and those who are deceived by TPLF machine, we need to help them to come on board, to be on our side, and to advocate for Ethiopia and for Tigray. And Tigray, we will rebuild Tigray. No question about that. The amnesty about TPLF getting in Canada and stuff, let them go. Let them leave. Go, just go wherever you want to go. We will make this right? And I hope it's not too far that the Tigrayan folks will say that the Day of Light, where TPLF is not on their shoulder and a burden, that help them, from progressing and from making history along with the remaining Ethiopians. I'll conclude with that, Hermela.
Yeah, I don't want to give the TPLF propagandists any ideas, but one of the things that we haven't, so if we see this show up in a few days, we'll know where it comes from. But one of the things that we haven't seen from Tigray for the last several months, maybe even for the last year, is you don't see, the TPLF even claiming that the people of Tigray are against the government. I know there was, a couple of photos after last June, but we don't hear the voices of the people in Tigray at all. We only hear the voices of TPLF officials and diaspora activists who are claiming things about what's going on in Tigray and what the people feel. We know that there are people fighting the war, obviously for it to still be active. But like I said, I talked to a good source yesterday today that said it's not what it used to be. So what does that mean? That means there's been a lot of casualties, so people have died in a war, and there's people that don't want to fight it, and so they're hiding in different places. I mean, imagine what it feels like to be hiding in a family member's home or hiding in some cave somewhere because you know that they're going to come and recruit you from whatever rural area that you live in, and you're not going to come back. We're not hearing these voices. We hear of the young kids that are coming out of Tigray, leaving their parents so that they're not recruited. But we're not getting any of this in the international media, and we're not getting any of this from, those who claim to be Tigray activists. And my suspicion is the United States knows very well how bad this is. They have satellite imagery everywhere. They know how far this went, but they were banking, just like the TPLF, on them winning so then they can rewrite the story, as a winner always does, at least in the history of Ethiopia. This time around, and this is connected to what you're saying about, us not celebrating when the war ends, there's nothing to celebrate. Everybody loses. When the war started already, everybody lost. Every time there's a war in Ethiopia, everybody loses. But the problem is, like we saw the Hawalti, which is like the monument in Tigray that signifies the TPLF's victory. It's this gold, monument that, looking at it, all it does is romanticize war. There's no indication that there's a loss of life and all the cost that actually goes into the end of the war. So what I would like to see in Addis Ababa and in different parts of Ethiopia is a memorial that carries the names of as many of the victims as we can find, so that we're constantly reminded what it means every time an entity decides to go to war to get into power, so that we do not make this look like some pretty ending. And that it's a daily reminder somewhere, some sort of public art or a museum that people can go to, that kids are taught about it, that, the Ethiopian government does not write the story. I understand there's going to be some level of celebration because it means we're getting under the chokehold or out of the chokehold of the TPLF. But overall, I think the perception of it and the way that we tell these stories has to be a lot more subdued. So I know we're going over time a little bit, so I want to use first. It looks like Elias, you want to say something, and Nebiyu.
Yeah, I don't want to conclude without saying this. I saw several comments saying that we should vote Democrats out. That's not what we are suggesting. What we are suggesting is being strategical about it, thinking about it thoroughly, approaching it from a strategic point of view. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. we want to vote on issues, look at the issues, get the commitment, follow up with them. We will have another chance to vote them out if they decided to change their mind. But let's not lean towards one party or the other. Let's make sure that we are issue voters. We vote on issue. We are pro-Ethiopians. Predictably clear that we are pro-Ethiopians. If you go against that, we'll vote you out. That's how we should take a look at it. But in addition to that, we have to consider the local factor as well. But pro-Ethiopian, predictably, no questions, no arguments about it. I just wanted to state that, Hermela.
Yes. Nebiyu, anything else to add before we go into our fire round of question and answer from the audience?
No, I think Elias have said it excellent and in a really good way. I have nothing to add.
Great. Okay, let's go through the questions. There's so many that I don't know if I'll be able to narrow through them. Okay, let's start looking at, there's a lot of conversations, by the way, about voting, which I think is a good thing, right? Whether people feel like it's not, it's not worth their time or not, it's something that people feel passionate about. Okay, let's go through. Will American troops intervene in Ethiopia to bring Wayane to power? What are the chances of that? We'll make this like a 60-second to 2-minute fire round. I'll start with you, Nebiyu. Is that something that crosses your mind? And then we'll go to Elias.
It crosses my mind, definitely. And if they could, they would. But I don't think there's an option for that anymore.
Elias.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. R2P is what we are referring. I don't think there is any basis for it. I don't think that's going to happen. Continuous engagement from our side will ensure that such a thing doesn't happen to Ethiopia.
And Kenneth is asking, if you were to go to Tigray, how would you know if that person is part of the TPLF or just a regular Tigrayan? Whew. That is an interesting question. See, this is why it's good to have like non-Ethiopians or Eritreans sometimes join, because there's like questions that you just don't. Yeah, I guess you would just have to talk to them. I don't know that there's any way, right?
There isn't really.
Yeah.
Well, if I may say just this, it doesn't matter. They could be, pro TPLF and or not, right? It just, let's have that conversation. Let's have that discussion. Right now, the bridge is closed because they are holding their lines and not listening to anything that we're saying. While in the meantime, people are dying right to left, right? Due to TPLF's undue burden on Ethiopia. So to me, I will talk to anybody. I'll talk to the TPLF. I'll hear them so long as they are reasonable and would be able to engage and discuss with me. That would be my take.
Fair. And Tam makes a point that I think is interesting. They say, you talk about the people of Tigray suffering, ignoring the massive suffering the TPLF continues to cause on Amharas in particular. I don't know if the TPLF's actually in the Amhara regions, or, we're talking about things that allegedly OLA has done, but I think that's a fair question. Sometimes I do feel like Tigray sucks the air out of the conversation about Ethiopia, and we are forced to talk about only Tigray and the suffering in Tigray when there's a lot of suffering still in the Amhara and Afar regions as a result of this war, suffering in the Oromia regions, different security issues that have been created in the last 4 years, that have come up in the last 4 years that aren't always addressed as timely and in a way that the majority of us would like to see. And so, yeah, what do you guys say about, the suffering in other parts? I think that's worth giving that a little bit of space. Nebiyu, you go first.
No doubt. I don't think that there's any other people that have suffered at the hands of the TPLF than the Amhara people. And this is evident by the TPLF manifesto. Even from the beginning, whenever they were established in the 70s, their manifesto explicitly stated that the Amhara people are enemies of Tigray. And obviously, Amharas and Tigray people are not enemies. They're one people, actually. But the TPLF used this as a way to create division so they can rule. And then also subsequently, the TPLF annexed a large amount of Amhara land in the Walqai, Tagade, and the Raya area, where for 3 decades, where they were massacring, ethnic cleansing Amhara people, and the world didn't care. And we're just now finding out the extent of this killing spree that lasted for over three decades, how bad and how terrible it's been. And I think more and more would come out. There is an exhibition going on by Jamal and Sheba that I know they're going around the country, and there's a lot that's being uncovered, massive graves and everything. So it's not disputed. It's real. And even during this war, after the TPLF broke the ceasefire last year, they invaded the Amhara region. They invaded the Afar region, where they destroyed over 3,000 hospitals and raped and killed and just did some barbaric things to just innocent people and children. And the Amhara region and the Afar region are going to pay for that, probably for generations to come. It's a massive amount. For the record, this war has not been fought in Tigray. It's been mainly fought in Amhara and Afar, right? And in fact, this is the first time that the war is occurring in Tigray, inside Tigray, since June of 2021. So, Tom Zena, you make an absolutely good point. I think that at least some of the wrongs are being corrected. For example, Walqait, Tagade, it's back and it's back in its own indigenous people. And I think that the TPLF is not going to be around anymore to dictate and to force their way in. No doubt, absolutely no doubt. But like what Hermela was saying, that there's so much propaganda from everywhere, even when the war was in Amhara and in Afar, even when the TPLF was committing these atrocities against the Amhara people and the Afar people, the world was talking about Tigray, right? Mm-hmm. So, like you said, that sucks the air out of the room, is because the massive global, whatever you want to call it, is always focused on Tigray, that we're always having to defend. We're always having to say, no, that's not right. That's not right. That you don't even have the room to expand and proactively really tell the truth. And that's why I really respect the work, people like Sheba and Jamal are doing, exposing this, and in due time it will come out. And I think that all of the Ethiopian people stand by the Amhara people, stand by the Afar people, because nobody deserves to be treated that way, the way TPLF has treated the people of the North. And things will change. Better days are coming, right? Now we're days away from witnessing the death of the TPLF, right? So a new dawn is upon us, a new day is upon us, and this is time to correct the wrongs and to make sure that such kind of atrocities does not happen to any people going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Elias, what do you want to add on this issue that Tam brought up?
Yeah, no, I mean, Nebiyu did an excellent point in summarizing it. But if I may add this, there are many untold sufferings of the Ethiopian people, be it Amhara, Afar, Oromo, in every different region. But the reason we are emphasizing on Tigray particularly is Tigray is being held hostage by TPLF. If this was a just world and if people just looked at the fact only, Tigray is a hostage of TPLF. No, there is no other word for it, right? So that is the emphasis goes there just a bit more because of that, and the fact that it is being used to break Ethiopia apart, in my opinion, my humble opinion. But as to the suffering, it doesn't stop on Afar, Amhara. Afar and Amhara suffered the most during this war, I believe, because of the proximity of Afar and Amhara. But I don't think it stopped there. It's extended throughout, even to the common people everywhere, from the economical sabotage to every aspect of it. It's reached in every Ethiopian home. The war has reached everybody's home, but Tigray is the hostage. and Afar and Amar were part of Hostage, now free, and hopefully the Tigrayan people would be free from TPLF forever as well.
Can I add just one thing on that, Hermela? Well, one of the things that has been an enabler for all this is ethnic politics. And that is one thing that the TPLF instituted in Ethiopia. Your ethnicity in Ethiopia is your political identity. Such a system has been outlawed in many countries, including many African countries, right? So I hope that, with the death of the TPLF, that in this new day and this new chapter we're turning, that politics in Ethiopia will become about philosophy, about ideology, and less about our tribe and race and this and that. Because, growing up in Ethiopia, I didn't experience that, especially in Addis Ababa. We didn't know what people's tribe were, right? And this is the thing that has been forced upon the Ethiopian people. A whole generation, 27, 30 years, were raised in this kind of toxic situation. So, I mean, it's a wonder that we're actually living together still. So I think that once this is done, the next chapter would be to recover and to heal the Ethiopian people from this toxic medieval tribal politics that has really, really divided us and made us suspicious of each other, made us all victims, right? We're all victims. It's sometimes like a race to who's more victimized. Mm-hmm. And this is what politics based on identity does for you. And this is something we need to get away from, and we can. And we have in the past. Our forefathers did not live like this, and we don't have to live like this anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just for those who don't know, and I'm sure many people in this room do know, but what the actual constitution that the TPLF wrote in 1994 says is it divides the country into these regions that are ethnic based, meaning on the surface that sounds like not a big deal, right? But what it actually does is it constitutionalizes ethnic discrimination. So say you had Arizona is only for Hispanics. Texas is only for white people. California is only for Black people. That's not a thing that people say. It would be actually in the Constitution, right? So there's a lot of issues of discrimination here in the United States, but what does it often come down to? Are these going against constitutional rights? And so you might have a neighborhood where people of color are sidelined through different measures, but if somebody can actually have the resources and be able to prove that and take it to court, there's a really good chance that they'll actually win that case, because constitutionally that is not allowed, that is prohibited. Ethiopia, it's flipped. Right, it's flipped. So you go to one region and it says this land, and I've talked to Daraja Demise, the attorney, about this, the way the Constitution is written. It literally says this land, say Oromia, belongs to Oromos. This land, Amhara region, belongs to Amharas. That is not a constitution for 2022 or for the 21st century altogether. So I think that is also something that will need to get addressed. Once again, this war and the TPLF propaganda continues to drain the space, but I do think that that's something that we need to talk about, and I do appreciate the work that Sheba and Jamal Countess do. I know it's not it's not a always a popular conversation in a time like this where the war front and the TPLF takes precedent, but I do think that is going to be something that needs to be addressed sooner than later. And like Elias mentioned, a huge fallout from this war, all over the country that needs to get addressed, that isn't right now because the war is sucking up so much energy. And the other thing I will say about the US and how much they're going to bat for the TPLF is I think they know, and I don't think they are ready for what is to come if the Ethiopian government actually takes control of this region and gets these stories out properly, because they can't say they didn't know. And so that's why it feels very personal in that they're fighting for the TPLF as if they're fighting for themselves. If you guys see any comments and questions that you find particularly interesting in the comment section, let me know. We've talked about this before, but for those who are tuning in for the first time, what do you think the negotiation talk results will be? I will preface it with this. So, Atakalti, Hylas, is it Haile Selassie? Yeah. Atakalti, I believe it's Haile. So he is an Ethiopian from Tigray who was in the interim administration after the federal government took control of Tigray. And he had an assassination attempt on him by the TPLF and has to have, high security living and working in Addis right now. And today, this is someone that's ethnically Tigrayan from, Ethiopian, worked in Tigray. He said, thinking that peace will be achieved by negotiating with TPLF leaders is madness and prolonging the misery of the people of Tigray. Our lofty agenda is how to quickly liberate our people suffering from hunger, disease, and oppression. I have no doubt that our people and the government will do it quickly. So not to influence your answer, although, I have a feeling that we all kind of tend to agree. Maybe Elias is I feel like Elias is more kumbaya than I am. more optimistic, I should say, because I came from the cult, so I'm don't have a lot of faith. But what do you guys think in terms of what can and can't come from these talks? Elias, you go first.
I don't expect much out of it, to be honest with you, Hermela. So I'm not very optimistic about the outcome, but there is nothing that's going to come from it. I think the war is already done, so TPLF could pack it and leave, right? But what I will see for Ethiopia is hopefully peace will come to Ethiopia entirely, right? If the government is going to give amnesty to all of the TPLF followers and just just leave it at that, I'm not sure how they're going to approach it, but it needs to come to some sort of a settlement, right? The question that I asked: how do you change the heart and minds of those folks who are in Tigray, who belong to the TPLF camp, right? How do you address that? Maybe that would be the outcome that I would look forward from this talks. But beyond that, my answer is very short. I don't anticipate much out of it. Hopefully, the war will be over. TPLF will be done, and will be settling all these issues and coming to a place where Ethiopia is sort of in a peace. At least Tigray is not going to be hostage, nor would Amhara and Afar would sustain the heavy and difficult suffering that was doled out by TPLF. That would be my thought.
There's something I'll add to that, Nebiyu, before you jump in. So, the username Amhara Ethiopia said, "My brother, when did they say they're hostage by TPLF?" I will say this. I think that, there's going to be some people in Tigray that feel that way, that know that is what their situation is. I also think there are others, whether it's a defense mechanism or that they truly believe it, that they have been indoctrinated. I'm not going to say to the point of no return, but it's going to need work to return them back to where they were 2 years ago, before, rather 3 years ago, before the TPLF retreated to Tigray. And all over media was constant warmongering. The Amharas hate you. They're the enemies. They're gonna, try to come for you. And then that got even escalated once they started this war. So there is a very deep level of indoctrination among some people who don't have access or exposure to a different kind of thinking, and who are constantly surrounded by these cultish type personalities. So I do think there is going to be some work that needs to be done in terms of the Ethiopian government and the people, communicating to the people on the ground. We've talked about potentially a military, I don't want to say occupation because it's the country, but some sort of a military government until there's some peaceful transition. Because, and this is just an opinion. I want people to have a measured expectation. I don't think this war is going to be so black and white in terms of the way it's won. I think that there's going to be steps and levels to it. And I do think the next step and level is to capture Mekele, but I do think there's going to be some people that are going to continue the guerrilla fighting. I don't know if they're going to be a significant amount, but I say that all to say I think we should all have the marathon mentality about it, in terms of how we interact on social media, how we write letters and vote and continue to engage politicians, continue to speak out against organizations and institutions in the State Department who are constantly feeding the propaganda. I get proud when I go into the comment section of the State Department or some so-called academic organization, and I see a bunch of Ethiopians and Eritreans saying, nope, that's not true, this is the truth, here's an article, here's video, here's all that. I think we need to continue to do that, because whether they care or not, people are watching. Other people who follow those organizations and think those organizations are credible, when they sit there and talk about Ethiopia, and you've got 98% of Ethiopians calling it out and saying, this isn't true, you've been doing this to us for years and this is the truth, I think it will make people think. Not everybody is totally decided on what they think. Not everybody is a State Department or official or a politician or works for these institutions and is getting paid for some of this stance. So I do think we shouldn't let up. So with that said, Nebiyu, and I know we've talked about this before, but I think every day there's a little bit more to glean from it. What do you think the negotiation talk results will be like? It's day 2, and we've got until Sunday the way it's scheduled.
I think that the success of this negotiation was going to be dependent on the military success of the Ethiopian government in liberating Mekele. Anything short of that, I think it's just back to zero. And that this is another ploy by the TPLF to buy time to regroup and reattack. And I think that that's why I'm betting more on the effort to liberate Mekele. Every lot in Tigray must be liberated, and I think that would make a difference. That's what I would say. Outside of that, I don't think the TPLF would, concede, given any concessions, unless they're forced, including to disarm or to surrender, and especially when they have such powerful friends that have the power to sanction you. They don't have any other incentive to negotiate meaningfully, unless you are forcing them militarily. And I think that I hope that the advances that have been made over the past few days will continue, and that I'm anxiously waiting for the breaking news to come out saying Mekele has been freed. That would be the biggest gift.
I know, cautiously anxious is what I am. And I think the work begins again. The new chapter of work begins. Okay, there's 3 more questions I've pointed out. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Thank you so much to Nebiyu and Elias. I didn't tell them how long this would be, so I'm sure they're wondering how long will this be. So we'll wrap up shortly. I really appreciate you guys' time, making the time on this evening. So thank you. You guys are both amazing. Let's get a few more questions in, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. David, my guess is you're maybe, not Ethiopian Eritrean, which I love that, people are in here. Or maybe you are. Maybe I'm making an assumption. But this is a question that I think is just worth discussing. Why is it so important to remove TPLF rather than to reform it? Elias,
it's not possible.
Yeah.
It is not possible. It's not possible to reform the TPLF. You cannot mix oil and water, can you? The TPLF cannot be reformed.
Yeah, I would say the same. Nebiyu, was very clear and to the point, right? What I would say, just if I may add a couple of things here, is that let alone. So the question was one question that I saw was that I didn't hear Tigran say that they are hostage, right? But just think about it. Let alone Tigrans, if you go to every aspect of Ethiopia, including the Amhara region, there were a lot of Amhara folks who whose allegiance was TPLF then was a government and was Ethiopia as a whole. So TPLF for the last 50 some odd years have worked on Tigrans to make them believe that others are their enemies. The Amharas are enemies. This is their enemy. They're afraid of all these different aspects of it. Although they suffered greatly under the hand of TPLF, they probably would not feel comfortable to come out and say, particularly was the cult mentality that TPLF has. They are going to be shunned out from the community. Not only that, harassed and potentially, their lives put in danger if they are within Ethiopia. So for that reason, you will not hear anybody say that this is our challenge. But we, when I say we, the diaspora, the Ethiopian diaspora, as well as the Ethiopian folks, we need to understand the position. We need to give a way for some sort of a reconciliation, so that those who wake up from the dream of TPLF and and realize where things are going would come back and would be the catalyst to help the remaining Tigrayans to realize that TPLF is nothing but a cult and has been a warmonger and has destroyed Tigray right to left, along with everybody else throughout the country. So I think it is, the burden is on us to help them understand and to move along. The initiation has to come from the folks from that side, but we need to engage them, have a discussion, and hopefully when this marathon is over in a few years, we'll get to a point where the concept of TPLF is no more in Ethiopia.
A few more questions there. Is AU led peace talks between Ethiopia and the U.S., or is it with TPLF, or with both? Nebiyu.
So I don't follow the question.
Are the peace talks between Ethiopia on one side and the U.S. on the other side, or is it Ethiopia on one side and the TPLF on the other side, or is it with Ethiopia on one side and the TPLF and the U.S. on the other side?
I think it's the latter. Ethiopia on one side and the TPLF, U.S., EU, UN, WHO on the other side. TPLF is definitely a proxy for all this interest groups that really are trying to make sure that their hegemony over the Horn of Africa remains. And TPLF is their bridge into that, and they don't want to let it go.
Elias, a specific question to you. Is it better to get rid of Joe Biden? Yes or no?
I don't think there's a way to get rid of him right now. We have to wait until the voting comes up. Yeah, but I don't think I'll be voting for the Biden administration individually as a person. But through talks and through discussion was administration, potentially my position might change as well. Like I said, I'm an issue voter, and if I see enough signs that there will be a course correction in that Ethiopia would be in a better place with a continued Joe Biden administration, potentially I might think about it. But at this junction, all of the facts and all of the evidences that I see are going to force me to vote against them when I come 2 years from now, I think. So.
Absolutely. Max is asking, does anyone know how the TPLF leadership left Mekelle? Yes, the U.S. military escorted them out of Tigray into South Africa. So there's tears of people in Tigray. There's children that are literally dying for this war, and then you've got TPLF leadership. They're being escorted in U.S. military planes. Next question for Nebiyu, it is Wahid Arena. My question to you and your guests, do you think the past 27 years TPLF terrorists ruled Ethiopia or Westerners ruled? In opinion, TPLF terrorists and their cadres were tools for Westerners. So I'll simplify this, with my own opinion. Was Ethiopia a U.S. colony and we just didn't know it under TPLF? Nebiyu.
Yes, it certainly was a client state. Ethiopia was used as the police of East Africa. The TPLF had one word for the West, and it was yes, sir. Whatever they wanted, they got. and it wasn't about the Ethiopian people. The TPLF, benefited out of it financially, economically, and as a result, they were able to get away with atrocities, just gross human rights violations for 27 years, mass arresting, torturing opposition groups. I mean, the things that they did in the Somali region, there's documentaries now coming out. The things they did in North Gondar and Walqait, the things they did in Addis Ababa, where they were shooting down protesters, hundreds of them. The things they did during Erecha, over 900 people in a single day.
Yep.
Without a single condemnation from the West, they were able to carry through this, and they were able to get away with it. So, that speaks for itself.
Yeah,
Elias, want to add something?
Yeah, just a few items here. Again, I'm not trying to mark a particular party with these issues, right? But if you go back and take a look at it, as much fun as we all did made on President George Bush, later in life, I come to respect him and to understand his positions as well, particularly towards Africa. George Bush had a better approach to Africa and a better governance across the continent as well, something that you also looked at. And if you look at during that time, TPLF was shunned out from George Bush's administration. So though there might be a different policy that is sustained throughout, but you see that a different kind of approach and a different kind of enforcement being applied to Ethiopia at different administrations. So to me, this highlights the need for our folks to engage, what I said earlier, in the voting aspect of it, in the get out the vote, in fundraising, in knocking your door, and in calling the different offices and saying, hey, this is my position, so that we can have ears here that could help us grow Ethiopia and make Ethiopia prosperous and have folks live in a better situation than they do today. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good comments today. Someone said the goal shouldn't be to reform or ban TPLF. It should be disarming TPLF. I agree. Put down the guns first, and then we can have conversations about who's who. What do you think? What's the difference? But I think as long as they're, they have the guns, then, my mom, Professor Hargwin, has said this, I think, very eloquently. Ethiopia will bleed forever as long as they're not disarmed. And this is not even good, like, she has said, for the people of Tigray, who have not overall have actually benefited from being in wars, constantly throughout the history. And then, so that was Gavide who said that. And then Didi said, once the entire Tigray is liberated, the most important job is to educate the people of Tigray well enough. I agree. Neptunister said, TPLF is irreformable. It's easier to change Muhammad into Jesus. Agree. And then WKS says they're too old, too corrupt, and it's like reforming Hitler, not imaginable. And then Graffiti says meaningful reform has to come from within the TPLF. I would argue within Tigray. The TPLF, to me, unreformable. And then how come TPLF leaders escaped? How come the Ethiopian government allowed this? TPLF is a war criminal. I think it's just a necessary concession. Do you guys feel any sort of way about the fact that they were able to leave and go to South Africa and sit for peace talks while this war is going on?
Nebiyu, you want me to take it first?
Go for it.
Oh yeah, my position is that if it means that it's going to bring peace to Ethiopia, let them leave. Let them leave. We have you don't want to lose the war for the battle, right? If the battle is to let them go and win the ultimate war and the ultimate heart of the remaining folks, we should absolutely do that. And I think that's what happened, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. If I may add one additional point to the discussion that we had earlier, I long to see an Ethiopia where people debate and discuss and win on ideas, as opposed to bullet and guns and physical aspect of it. Right? It has to be raised up just a little. Just let's debate on our differences and celebrate and respect our differences at the same time. So that's all I want to say.
Nebiyu?
Yeah, I mean, if ideally peace and justice would come together, but you know, at this point, if this 9 people going into exile, if that means peace is going to come to 120 million people, I'll take it.
Yeah, and I'll add that I believe, and I think I've talked to someone who said this, and then another person who seems to think that it could just be a blanket amnesty. But there needs to be some sort of negotiation about what that amnesty looks like. They can't just be taking part in Ethiopian politics. I mean, you saw Mengistu Hailemariam, who was a part of the GERD. He was not really allowed to talk, or publicly anyway. I think that was a part of the agreement, and that should be something that should be required. They shouldn't be able to get into Ethiopian politics for a decade at least, based on how much damage, or at all, for a lifetime. I don't think it's much to ask, especially since so many people lost their lives needlessly on all sides. I mean, I have so much sympathy for everybody who's lost their lives, but I do think that, and this isn't a but situation, but I do think that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and those in Ethiopian Eritrea who did not choose this war, but are putting their lives on the line and have put their lives on the line to defend this country and the sovereignty of this country, I think are absolutely true heroes. When I was in Addis, there was a award ceremony where this family, a mother and her 2 kids, one of them very little boy, were going up to get an award on behalf of the father who had passed away in the war. And it was just so difficult to watch, because in that moment you realize, oh my gosh, this is really, people are losing their fathers needlessly, and they didn't have to. They didn't have to defend their country. They didn't have to leave their home and pick up a gun and not come back to their kids. So I just really think that's something that's worth mentioning. Elias, you said, would any of us run for office anytime soon?
That was one of the comments that I saw there.
Okay.
And so the point was, I think as a diaspora, as a whole, we need to start thinking a little different. And in that, if you are able to run, if you have the ability and the capability to perform at that level, we have to think a little different. We have to start saying that this is possible. We have seen it in Virginia. Nebiyu has done it several times in Colorado. He has supported different candidates and had made sure that we support that effort and people get elected. We showed it in Virginia, and hopefully this year, I think if I'm not wrong, Ohio would be doing a protest vote potentially. If that happens, we will consistently show and perform at the level that people will start paying attention. And at that time, if you are able to run for office, yeah, do it. Let's help you. Let's be your voice and get you in the office, so that you'll be the person behind those closed doors to listen and to speak on behalf of us. So I just want to say that.
I think Nebiyu would be great, actually.
I think so too.
He's got the voice, the way he makes his speeches. Nebiyu, would you ever run for office?
No, I enjoy playing the kingmaker than actually running.
I love it. Very important job. It's not something that I'm interested in, honestly. I just think you have to have a different personality for it. But I've been encouraged and pushed, from many directions. I just don't know.
I think it would be great. I think it would be great.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm about that congressional life. I don't know.
You both have my vote. You both have my vote. Even though I don't live where you are, I'm definitely contributing to your campaign once you decide to run.
Thank you.
You got to be the campaign manager. The way
I know. What are you talking about? You got to volunteer. Go to knock on doors. I mean, I will say this: if anyone was to run, in the coming years, and I love that we're even talking about it. there's a support system that's being built. There's an infrastructure that's being built to be able to support you. Because I've done a couple of campaigns, not like worked for them, but volunteered a couple of times, and I've learned so much about how much human capital it actually takes, especially if you're trying to run a grassroots organization. And of course, it takes money as well, which also requires people calling the phones for you, walking around for you, and knocking on doors. And so a part of this, part of what we're doing now can absolutely transfer to supporting somebody who wants to run for office. So please, if you're considering doing it, particularly some of the young folks, the support is here for you. So go.
So, we have an Ethiopian candidate running for office right now. In fact, a candidate that EADC supports very much is Tedros Fikre in Virginia, in the middle of, the most that's the part of the United States that has the largest Ethiopian population. You have an Ethiopian man, Tedros Fikre, running for office. I encourage you to vote for him. This is how we get in, and he's the first candidate to qualify to run for a general election. So really, history is being made in Virginia. He's running as an independent, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, as an independent, and he's doing really quite well. And for folks that live out in Virginia, I highly encourage you vote for for Teddy Fikre.
If I can add one thing there, Nebiyu, my only frustration there was that he didn't go against Jerry Connolly. Man, Jerry Connolly, we need to get that guy out of the office because he is saying very condescending things towards our community. Not only that, he is like in the pro-TPLF camp. So we need to address him someday. Maybe not.
Where is he, Elias? Since this is national, where is he and what's his position?
Virginia. He's a congressman, I think District 11, if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
We had a one-on-one meeting with his staffer, and it was a debate. But the Ethiopian government does that. The Ethiopian government does this. And I was going to come to the point and tell them, like, dude, I ain't the Ethiopian government. I'm an Ethiopian American, right? So it came to that point, that far. So if the staffer say that to us, my thought was that how would the congressman react towards us? And if you live in that area where Jerry Connolly is, vote for anybody you want. Just put an empty vote card if you want to. Please go out. Please vote. Make sure your voice is heard. And if you hear me, call your friends, relatives, colleagues. Make sure that they don't vote for Jerry Connolly. Let's find folks who act as such, and let's address them. Just if I may add those points.
Yeah, sometimes it's knowing who not to vote for. There's been times where I've been at the voting booth and see a name like, definitely not that person. So we're just going to go with somebody else. And I think that also has value too, because, to my, infuriation, I'm pretty sure I voted for the local congressman here in California, Brad Sherman, who's one of the worst people on Ethiopia, because I hadn't done my research. And a lot of times what people do is they go with the incumbent, and I did. And I just think about the horror of that, 2 years ago, me having marked a check next to his name because I just wasn't educated on it. So sometimes you just need to know who not to vote for. And sometimes those people are the incumbent. The people that have been in office too long are way too comfortable, have no problem demonizing a region of 140 million people like California's Brad Sherman does. And that makes a difference. 2 more questions. This is like the Habesha goodbye right here. I've been saying this for like 30 minutes. But Rahel Bayene and Tibabe Garredo, you guys are the last 2 questions. So Rahel says, I really need to hear you guys' take on what does AU's Musa Faki, that sounds so funny. Okay, Musa Faki Mohammed's travels to Canada. It's getting late, guys. It's Eyes on Africa After Dark. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I really need to get your take on what his visit to Canada means. I put it out there because I just want people to follow what's going on as it's going on, so that if weird things happen, that there's a way to track it. But I wasn't necessarily insinuating something about this trip. What do you guys make of this trip at this time?
I mean, there's a lot of things that are pointing to Canada. Does it mean anything? Is it pure coincidence? Who knows? But it's really not that important at the end of the day. But it is good that we pay attention to everything and try to connect the dots. But I wouldn't spend too much energy on what's happening there until we find out really if this has to do with arranging an exile for the TPLF warlords.
Elias, anything to add?
I think that you said it well. I don't think it matters to us, particularly for the diaspora aspect of it, and I don't think it means much to Ethiopia. So hopefully, not much.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree right now. I think it's more important to address, issues like, the Holocaust Museum coming out with that super propagandistic, oh, we might have lost Nebiyu. Wow, this is a big question you're going to have to answer with me, Elias. I'm sure he'll be back on. But yeah, I think it's more important. There he is. I think it's more important that we address these issues from different outlets and organizations that are happening instead of speculating about what is going to happen. Last but not least, and I think this is a really important question, and I'm not going to preface it with anything, so I'm just going to ask you guys because I'm curious what you think. Tebebe says, what I'm afraid about is what the West can do in terms of economic pressure to force Ethiopian government into an unpopular decision. Who wants to go first? Big one.
A lot. I mean, a lot. They could do some pretty big damages to Ethiopia, and those threats have been intensified, and I mean that's really what's happening at the end of the day. But are they bluffing? Can they really do it? At the end of the day, though, what happens is that the United States does not have as much leverage as it used to have before. And sanctions are not as effective anymore. I want to take you back to the time last year when the Biden administration delisted Ethiopia from AGOA. What happened within 48 hours? The foreign minister of China was in Ethiopia talking to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, signing a $10 billion deal to give immediate relief, and then another 200 billion or million, some huge deal, right? That to offset that. So what I'm trying to say is that there are other investors with money that are really interested in Africa, whether it's China, Turkey, India. These are emerging markets with huge market capital and the cash to operate in Africa. And when it comes to the United States, 1/3 of Africa is already under sanction. So these economic benefits are being missed by the United States. And the other thing is the US already have a disadvantage over some of these other countries like China. For example, the US government cannot just go to Africa or cannot go to Ethiopia and invest $10 billion. It has to use private companies because this is a capitalist system that it has to be a private sector that goes into Ethiopia and invest. And that's a whole other animal, right? So the U.S. already has its hide tied behind its back as far as competing in global economics, especially in emerging markets like Africa, where over 50% of the world's resources are coming from currently, and where there is a young, educated population ready to work. So for this administration to follow through with its threats and actually doing an economic sanction on Ethiopia is going to hurt the United States. Remember, the United States is already in debt. What is the debt right now? 40 trillion. So it's gonna be like a murder suicide. You hurt Ethiopia and you hurt the United States as well. So I think the American people altogether also don't have an appetite for this anymore. This hostile economic policies and using economy as a method of warfare. So I think that, and even if they did go through with the sanctions and sanction Ethiopia, the TPLF is not going to come back. It's done, right? So, I mean, they can sanction. I mean, Eritrea has been sanctioned for decades. Cuba has been sanctioned for 60 years. I mean, there's, like I said, 1/3 of Africa is sanctioned, and they're doing just fine, right? So, if they do pull the trigger on this, that it would not be good for the United States either. So, with that, I don't think that they will.
Elias, what do you think about this sort of economic warfare and threatening? I mean, the IMF loan that's being held is something that has been a part of the conversation, sort of collateral, and it is something that does concern me. I think about, okay, how can we support if the time comes, just the same way that the Eritreans and the Eritrean diaspora do support Eritrea during these years and continued years of sanctions. What do you make of this leverage that the U.S. appears to have on Ethiopia?
Yeah, I think no, you hit most of the points there. It's a real trait. It might come to that point, but the question is, do you sell your sovereignty, yourself, or is your respect for continued being told what to do and how to jump, where to jump, and barely having any progress? Look at Ethiopia for the last, I don't know, 27, 30 years now. I mean, 27 years. Leave the Abiy administration for later time, because they are working through war and at the same time trying to develop the country. But looking at the 27 years, I mean, who benefited out of that? We were used as a sort of like the same thing that they did to 1/3 of the Tigrayan people. They used the people to beg money to steal it and get it out of there. The same thing happened to every Ethiopian in every aspect of Ethiopian in every direction. And plus, one thing that we missed to address also is that throughout all this humanitarian organization, take WHO being the prime example, they have put their own people. The TPLF has put their own people whom they leveraged during this rough time, and put in Ethiopia in a very difficult position. I think any aid organization, non-governmental organization, pretty much, there is a TPLF fund, right to left in every direction, and that was leveraged to harm Ethiopia. And would Ethiopia face economical challenges if if there's some sort of an agreement doesn't come? Yeah, potentially. But what does that mean to us? I think, Hermela, you hit that on the nail as well. We are going to be working much harder, every one of us. This is a marathon. Again, we need to engage all of the candidates, all the politicians, continued engagement. And we have learned how to work within the system. We understand, what it means, to be heard, right, and how to get heard. So, we are going to focus on the voting. We are going to focus on the letter writing campaign. We are going to focus on having a meeting one-on-one with different leaders so that we can impact the policy enforcement of the Biden administration, and hopefully the next administration wouldn't be as negligent as this, as ignoring as many of the facts on the ground and crafting policies that basically is attempting to destroy Ethiopia. But it's a real threat, and we need to be prepared for it. The Cubans lived through that threat forever, and the Eritreans are living through that as well. And as you put it, the world is changing as well. But beyond that, the burden is going to be on us, on the diaspora. We have to work day in, day out to make sure that our families do not, carry that burden. So that would be my point.
Absolutely. I think the work that we're doing needs to be managed in terms of like how much time you put into it and how you, as a person, manage it with your life, your family, your friendship. But it does need to be kind of a lifestyle, that we're more, civically engaged, that we're engaged in what's going on in Ethiopia. We can't really be hands off for decades to come, because things didn't happen overnight. And so it's a long road, certainly a marathon. You guys, thank you so much for giving us your time like this. Seriously, I know it's been a long day for both of you, both such really good insight. Still like 1,200 people on, and if I wanted to abuse you, I would ask you to stay on, but I'm not going to do that. I know, Elias, you do not have an evening left, but there's a little bit of hope for Nebiyu because of time zones. But thank you both so much. Really appreciate all the work that you do on and offline. True leaders, and I look to you for energy when times get rough. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, Hermela, if I may add something that I entirely forget. There is a lot of work that happens through APAC. APAC has been doing. Nebiyu and I are both the volunteers, and Nebiyu, you might have more role there, but I'm a volunteer for APAC and I've been doing several different work. And the one thing that I encourage everyone here is to go on APAC site and donate whatever you can, because APAC has been contributing to a lot of campaign, and it's expensive. The work we do is not cheap. There are lobbyists, PR firms, and different folks that need to be paid. So whatever you can, the website is Hermela. I got it. So if you can go there and just contribute whatever you can. If you could do it a monthly contribution, we will greatly appreciate it, and we'll make sure that through our hard work and our effort, Ethiopia will prosper and we'll get to a better place tomorrow.
Great. Yeah, we made you guys work. Let's make everybody else work in here. Nebiyu, any plugins?
I just want to encourage everybody, hit follow Hermela TV on YouTube, Twitter, every platform she's on. Support her. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Last but not least, I want to plug again, if you live in Virginia, vote for Teddy Fikre. That's my plug for today. Teddy Fikre, Ethiopian American, running for Congress in Virginia.
I support.
Love it. Thank you guys. Please go to eoanews.com, eyesonafricanews.com for more. We're constantly updating the website, giving the perspective or the African story from the perspective of the Ethiopian people and the African people as a whole. There is clearly a need for us to tell our own stories, and this is just the beginning of doing that. So please support the independent work that we do by going to eoanews.com, or you can become a member by going to patreon.com/Hermela TV and be a monthly subscriber. Please like and share this channel and this conversation with everybody that you know, with all the group chats that I know that you're in, all the WhatsApp group chats, Telegram group chats, and Twitter group chats. So thank you so much, Elias Hiruy from the American Ethiopian Public Affairs Committee, and Nebiyu Asfaw, co-founder of the Ethiopian American Development Council. Thank you both so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in, for all your comments and questions. I see them all. I'm going to log some of them for another conversation. Thank you. Good night. Good morning, wherever you are. Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.